50 years ago, 70 years ago, like women needed men for certain kinds of things, and relationships were about security and building family and, you know, working the farm or working the land. I mean, it's only been 100 years or so in 160,000 years where that has shifted, where now we get to be in relationship for other reasons, for healing, for the amplification of love, for sexual expression, all these things.
So listeners, I've got another wonderful guest, a man I've followed for a long time. And I've been looking forward to this day. I feel lucky enough to have met him in person as well. John, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, David. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm a bit warm.
As you know, hear it's really warm in London. Yeah.
And when London gets warm, it's not like a nice, fresh heat. It's just like sticky, oppressive heat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember it. Like New York, I imagine.
Yeah. And I know you know London a fair bit. You just said before we got on, it was one of the places where you ran your first workshop.
Yeah. I sort of launched my career in London. Just I took my daughter to London to, you know, kind of be my assistant a couple of times, and it holds a sweet place in my heart.
Oh, beautiful. And I thought I'd start the episode off with, I always love to know people's stories, and I've heard a little bit of yours from speaking, you know, being in your spaces. Like, what was your journey to do the work you do now? Like, what was the catalyst that kind of propelled you out of where you were into this world? Yeah,
well, thank you. I came kind of late, you know, later than you. There's a whole generation of men coming in their 20s. I came in probably my late 30s. And the catalyst was a marriage that dissolved, and a marriage where I was pretty much at fault. And I realized coming out of that marriage, and then a couple relationships after that I really didn't understand what the feminine wanted from us, you know, and what it took to create really deep spaces of love and trust. I just realized, like, wow, something, you know, I came from a family of multiple divorces and lots of, you know, just not that, right? And so I realized if I wanted to learn that was actually a skill that, you know, I wasn't given, like most people, right? Most of us don't come from, you know, perfect, loving households. God bless our parents. So I realized I had to learn it, just like having to learn tennis or learn piano or learn any art. And I was turned on through the Tony Robbins world. I'm the guy that came to Tony Robbins through some like middle of the night infomercial. And I call it the myth of the good husband. I was married. We had a beautiful little house in Westwood, a daughter. I was a pillar of my community, and I still couldn't really show up for my life. And so I went through Tony Robbins, and then through Tony Robbins, I heard about this guy named David Data, who specializes in relationships. And I went to one of David's workshops and was immediately hooked, like a wow, I didn't know this kind of work was possible, both with women and with other men, because there's a big component of men working with men in his work. And I was hooked. And this was, 15 years ago. And I followed him around everywhere, went to every workshop I could, you know, became an assistant, you know, eventually started teaching with David for a couple of years, and along the way, just started to pull every bit of information around men's work and relational work that I could. And through all that, developed my own framework of you know, what I think men need. And mainly it's just been kind of what I've done on my journey. You know, everything from, you know, you've been in one of my workshops, and I pull everything from stuff from the forum to stuff from David and Toltec shamanism, and I try to pull as much what I think would be helpful information for men as I can. I practice it first, you know, like the shadow work we did is something that I kind of came up with a version of it I came up with on my own, and then I just practice it. And after I practice it, I start bringing it to other men, and I've developed this framework of, relational intimacy and of men's work that I feel, works pretty well and resonates pretty well. So it's been a 15-year, I'm my own client, and then if it works for me, then I try to bring it to other people.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. And I've helped myself when you were talking there, and you were like, yeah, I wanted to know what the feminine wanted. And part of my mind was just wanted to go, John, tell us, what does the feminine want? But we're going to wait.
Well, I have a better idea now.
Oh, yeah.
It's still, easier said than done oftentimes. But yes, I have a much better idea now. Yeah.
Because it's a tricky beast to dance with, as I see from my own life. And, it's and I find it interesting that, you speak to many teachers and men that I've spoken to on this podcast. It's like most men come to this work because of their own pain. Divorce is a really common one. Yep. Hitting lows and depressions is a common one as well. Breakups, that's something that comes to my world a lot. Men coming through breakups. Like, I wonder, what is it about men and only seeking help when, as we say in the UK, and I imagine it's the same in the States, when shit hits the fan?
Yeah. Well, I think it's human nature to only change when the pain gets great enough. But I think in particular for men are constantly assessing resources, right? What do I have resource for? And unless it's a priority, unless we feel like, oh shit, something's really got to change, we will harness our resources to what we think is going to make us win. Men are kind of, focused on winning in business, winning in relationship, winning in life. And so unless we think it's going to help us win, unless we get the information that it's going to help us win, then we won't dedicate our resources to it. And the problem has been really that the things that men need to win, really win, not just make money, right? Like anybody can make fucking money, I have tons of clients who are incredibly successful and still feel like they haven't won the way they need to in their relationships and in their life. So the skill set that I think men need to win, nobody taught us that it was different. That it was a crucial skill set, like that currencies like presence and depth and embodiment and capacity to transmit massive amounts of love or hold massive amounts of energy. Nobody taught us those things, that those were the things that would actually lead to a deeper sense of winning. They taught us, find a woman you love and, nature will take care of the rest. They taught us, make money and get successful and, you'll find everything else will work out. They taught us, be in good shape and, be a good athlete, be strong and, things will work out. And it's not the case. It's not the case. So, just too many successful people will tell you, it's not, money is not the answer. Success is not the answer. There's a deeper sense of something that hopefully, I think men your age, hopefully guys that are following you, are starting to wake up to, like, oh, depth matters, presence matters, consciousness matters, integrity matters, all those things matter. So.
And I think of, a lot of men I talk to, especially through social media, and they're like, I don't make enough money, that's why I can't get women. And I've been in enough workshops and programs over the years and sat with men who are incredibly successful. And one of the things that I've noticed is those men have the same woman problems as men who are not wildly successful. It's the same problems, right? It's the same problems they're dealing with, right? Yep. And the other thing that kind of leaked out, where you said, you talked about, depth, holding a massive amount of love, presence, and stillness. And this is, I imagine for you, this is the masculine energy. This is the masculine that needs to be transmitted through our bodies, through our ways of being.
That's what I find. I just wrote a book on it, and I think that I call them currencies, right? There's, presence is a currency. The ability to be playful is a currency. The ability to have depth is a currency. And the ability to be grounded, right, is a currency that occurs as valuable to the feminine in particular, but the world, right? You know, I mean, we all want to be around people who are present, grounded, expansive. And so I just think that, you know, the strategies of success, those are one set of strategies, right? You know, I mean, marketing and, you know, everything we're taught to do on social media and all those kinds of things. But there's also another strategy of success, is the transmission that you bring to the world. And you know, people want to feel deep transmissions. They want to feel transmissions of abundance. They want to feel transmissions of confidence. And so our capacity to embody those things, right, is our capacity to transmit those things. And again, that's a very specific skill set that nobody ever said, hey, nobody ever taught us. I don't know, a lot of kids, maybe now, maybe this generation, like nobody taught us to breathe and ground. You know, nobody taught us to, like, you know, soften our hearts and, you know, drop our shoulders back and, you know, feel down into the earth. And, you know, I mean, nobody taught that stuff. You know, unless you grew up in a very specific martial arts background, or you grew up with, you know, hippie meditating yoga parents, or, you know, which some people do. But so I think what's happening is that men are realizing, like, oh shit, the things we were taught are not the things that actually work. And so I get a lot of guys that come to me who are in long-term relationships, and they feel like they've been good husbands, good partners, right? All of those things. And yet something is still missing. Some piece is still missing. And that's oftentimes when guys come to me.
Yeah. There's, you know, those aspects of life. No one taught me, you know, my dad wasn't around really to be telling me about those things. My dad was too busy to be telling me never to get married, because married people get boring. And my mum was running around looking after 4 kids. So, she was in the space of caring, keeping us in order, giving us some discipline. And so, no, most people are not being taught this idea of being grounded, of being present, of being still, of feeling even. Yeah. We're not even really taught to feel, you know, as men especially, right. But I think the same for women.
Right. That's another currency, like the capacity. I talk about it in the book. It's I call it sensitivity, but it's not emotional sensitivity. It's the capacity to feel, right? And the capacity to feel like a ninja, you know, can feel all around, or like any great athlete, or oftentimes musicians, like, you know, artists learn to feel their art, right? And so relationship is an art, and as a yoga, as David would say, and so learning to feel is another really very deep currency that I think a lot of men, you know, struggle with, mainly because we're thinking, how do I win? How do I win? How do I win? How do I win? All the time, not like feeling what's happening in the present moment.
Yeah, and I see, I don't know if it was you that mentioned it on the program, it's like we overthink in avoidance to feel. We just keep running around the thinking of the story around the feeling without really stopping and dropping in and feeling and being present to the actual feeling that's there for us, whether that's fear, whether that's anxiety, worry, or stress. We kind of just skirt around the edges that almost makes it worse and more prolonged.
Very much. I mean, these thought loops are protectors, let's call them, right? Like our ego creates a lot of defense strategies, and most of those defense strategies involve thinking, right? Or involve some kind of closure, some kind of protective mode, some kind of like not leaning in with an open heart, not leaning in, you know, with presence and depth. And so, yeah, I think that, you know, we overthink things, and in overthinking things, we avoid feeling them, because our thoughts will change when we feel. We have a certain set of thoughts when we aren't feeling, the moment, the space, our bodies, our partners, right? And those thoughts are kind of, let's call them habitual. And we're used to them. And then if we drop into the space, into the moment, into our thoughts, into our bodies, and into the body of the person we're in front of, our thoughts will literally change. We'll have a different frequency, a different resonance. I mean, they're proving this stuff now, measuring brain waves and all kinds of, alpha, gamma, data waves, delta waves, beta waves. So they're proving all this. So embodiment has a very specific value that I think men are just now waking up to.
And I know from some studies I did on some of the work by HeartMath, I think it is, they're seeing that the heart sends out an electromagnetic field that has the power to shift other people's electromagnetic field, even if there's no words exchange, and even if they don't see any of their facial expressions. My feeling of love and relaxation and presence can influence people in and around me.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the, I would call that evoking, and we're always evoking from the people we're around. Oftentimes it's just very subtle and unnoticed. But once we start to notice, like, oh, my anxiety is actually making her tense, or my open-hearted presence is relaxing her, or my unfiltered, unfettered expression of love is actually evoking that from her or them. It becomes a really sort of fun practice to watch what you can evoke with different levels of presence, different states. Desire can evoke desire. Love can evoke love. Yeah. Anger can evoke anger. It's pretty obvious when you think about it.
Yeah. And you touched on embodiment and you touched on evoking then. It feels like you explained evoking. Could you just explain embodiment just for the listeners that are not sure on that term?
Yeah. Embodiment means, I look at it a couple different ways. The two definitions that I use, one is to literally have your awareness be in the body, to have your body sense it, to have your senses, your sensations. You can become aware of the deeper parts of you, whether those deeper parts of you are in your body or part of your consciousness or part of your heart. And you can bring your awareness from thoughts, right, which is where they live 90% of the time, into deep spaces of the body. And that's just a matter of being aware of breath, for example, or being aware of your feet on the ground, or being aware of the space below your navel, right? So that's one way. The other way I like to define embodiment is to take these traits that we've been talking about, consciousness, presence, depth, and take these sort of these concepts and make them real through the body, so that people can actually feel them through you. And I would call that transmission. I said in the book that masculinity is a transmission. Masculinity is a transmission of depth, consciousness, clarity, integrity. And so to be a transmission of, let's call it the masculine, or what I would consider masculinity, we literally embody those traits. And then once we embody them, people just naturally feel them, in our presence.
It's bringing an idea into a physical way of being. I think of dance, I love to dance. So I think of embodiment, I think of dance, and I've got a little nephew, he's 3 years old. And I love to watch him because he'll see something on TV and then he'll just want to embody it. He'll see someone doing something silly and then he's just that invokes him, and he's just and he'll just run around. And I find it to be it's beautiful to watch him because he so effortlessly does it, Yeah. Whereas I think sometimes as adults, we might be with someone who's super loving and there's a tightness, we kind of contract. It's almost we don't want that embodiment to affect us in any way too much because of our story and so forth. But children just embody whatever it is that comes to them so easily and effortlessly.
Yeah. Play. Basically he's just embodying play, and it impacts the whole room. Everybody smiles, everybody laughs, everybody's heart's open, you know what I mean? And you're right, we forget that as adults, but the same metaphysical and physical laws apply. If we play, if we open our hearts, if we're in any particular state, pick a state, love, desire, depth, consciousness, then, people around us will naturally feel it and it'll naturally impact their nervous systems, which puts a lot of responsibility on us when you think about it, right? Like, oh shit, I'm responsible for the level of depth and presence that I show up with, because it literally impacts the field and the people. And I think that's what a lot of men are waking up to. I certainly hope.
Yeah, we see. We see it in our relationships, and we see that also in our workplaces, right? Like, people gravitate towards people who give off a certain calm and confidence and ease. Like, even, I work a lot in the dating space, and I was explaining something to someone recently. It was like, one of the big problems with dating apps, which we won't go into probably today, is that we see pictures and we swipe and we look at the kind of superficial nature of it, but what we don't get is a sense of their vibe, how they feel to be around. Like, that lost art. It's not a lost art, but we're losing out on, because really that's the thing that attracts us. That's the thing that magnetizes us, is that being in someone's presence and how it feels, the vibe, the vibration of somebody.
Yeah, some people can transmit it, I guess, through apps or online, but it's trickier. It's trickier.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned your definition of masculinity, and that seems quite different from the societal idea of masculinity. There's societal idea of masculinity is traits, behaviors, and traits and behaviors are commonly associated with men. That's quite a big shift and change from how you describe it.
Yeah, well, I just tend to think that the masculine over the last, few thousand years has come to mean some form of strength, domination, accumulation, winning. I said this before. It's like some sort of, when you look at images of the masculine throughout the 20th and early 21st century, the masculine is doing something as a show of strength. We're getting the girl, we're scoring the touchdown, we're kicking the goal, we're, we're doing the things that occur as winning, as what the men through what the patriarchy, quite frankly. So the masculine that we were sold was the masculine of the patriarchy, right? Accumulate, win, right? And I think now there's a sense that the masculine is much fuller, both in the masculine spectrum, including like depth, presence, etc., but also much more full on the feminine spectrum, right? And the capacity of, let's separate men from the masculine, right? Like, so we all have a masculine, and the masculine, I could have a woman stand in front of the room and like masculinize the whole room with her presence, depth, breath. I've done it. I've done it in workshops, and vice versa, right? So the masculine and the feminine are separate from men. I think what men are finding is that a much fuller range of depth in both directions is what the world is calling for. Our capacity for deeper sensitivity and expression, and our capacity for deeper grounding and conscious depth. And so I think that the masculine has not been taught to men in the way that I like to teach it, in the way I was taught, and I think that's changing.
And do you see that like this work of teaching men the masculine is in fact the antidote to a lot of not just of the world's troubles, but even the troubles that men are dealing with? Men are very depleted and low and depressed and unhappy, and we know all the statistics about suicide.
Yeah.
Is this what's been missing from men's lives, or is there something else that's also missing from their lives?
I think on both sides of it, right? I think both. I think that the trouble that men are having, and again, I'm saying men, is that they don't have a deep sense of what let's call it the sacred masculine or the core masculine or their masculine essence is. They still think that masculine means winning in some form. And they also don't have a fully fleshed out feminine. They don't know how to express themselves. They don't know how to nourish themselves. They don't necessarily cultivate intuition or sensitivity. And so, yeah, I think that men are learning that they need to cultivate a deeper expression of both in order to have a full life. Now, does that mean that you're automatically happy and get everything you want? No, it means that you get to feel more, you get to express more, you get to love more deeply, you get to, you get to serve more deeply. It just, the more capacity, I'll call it capacity, the more nervous system capacity that a man has in both directions for stillness and expression, let's say, or sensitivity, the more trusted and trustable he becomes in the world. And so the more responsibility he receives. That's just kind of how I see it. And I see it in guys through my programs, that have been in my program 3, 4, 5 years. I've watched them like really, their lives have just they've just magnetized, I guess would be a way to put it. They've magnetized, different relationships and different financial situations and different opportunities, different levels of respect and trust in their community. So I'm pretty sure it works, from what I've seen.
So it's like you're advocating this range because, I see in some of the other teachers of Polarity, not a huge amount, but some where they really just talk to men about the importance of the masculine, the leadership, still with tinges of winning in there, there's still some tinges of winning and high competition. Yeah. And like, what's your take on that? What's the kind of downsides of only focusing on being, quote unquote, more masculine?
Yeah, that's half of who we are as human beings. So to be more, and what they're defining as masculine, oftentimes gets misinterpreted. David's work kind of gets misinterpreted. My work gets misinterpreted a lot. And, what it means to be masculine, according to a more ancient meditative, yogic, and spiritual approach, means that you're more tethered to that which never changes, to the reality that never changes. And so if since men have never been taught that, oftentimes the first thing they need to learn is that, right? That the masculine is about being connected to consciousness, stillness, emptiness, depth, all these things that are unchanging realities within us, right? So the first step is to learn the masculine. Well, if you just stop there, you're not in a relational pose because you're not cultivating sensitivity and expression and the capacity to transmit love. The capacity to love is the feminine in all of us. The capacity to rest as consciousness is the masculine in all of us. And so, men that are just taught to, this kind of, I'm gonna get in trouble here, but I'm gonna call it like this updated version. It's like an updated version of what we've already done, I'm just, that is not the masculine. That is one, warring, right, is one aspect of masculine capacity, right? And I'm all for the warrior. I am all for the warrior. But what is the warrior in service of? Is the warrior in service of love and freedom? Is the warrior in service of, a show of strength and domination? These are fucking important things that men have to decide for themselves. I'm not here to tell them that, but to teach expression without teaching depth is a mistake. And I see a lot of men's programs do that. Like, it's all about my vulnerability and my expression. That's teaching them the feminine without teaching them the masculine. And the opposite is also true. To teach them depth and stillness and grounded awareness without teaching them sensitivity and full expression is just teaching them half of it. So my argument is that a fully integrated man has a deeply expressed capacity to feel and share and love, while having a deeply expressed capacity to ground in the moment and deepen a moment with his presence or her presence or their presence. Because this is not gender specific.
And a lot of people get tripped up with the masculine and feminine with gender. Like I see this. They really, and I get it. I'm sure I'm imagining that you've had some shots fired your way over the years, because people are really entrenched in the meaning of what they make those words mean, opposed to what they're being meant by those that are speaking those words.
Yeah. And for good reason, because there's just been so much cultural baggage with gender that it's now hard to tease apart the gender energetic characteristics from the biological gender. So, it's going to take another 10, 20, 30 years, but not that long, given this, given the state of human history. I mean, you think about, people who are really young, how fluid, kids in high school are, gender fluid they are. And, but still, even the gender fluid, I used to have this conversation with my daughter a lot. She's like, yeah, the boys are really they're really sensitive and they're really expressive and but they can't sit still. They can't hold presence. They can't ground. And what I see in co-ed workshops all the time is just how important it is to be in a fully feeling state while grounded, while still. It's not to just be still and stare at them it's to be still with a wide open heart. It's to be still while feeling everything. It's to be still while expressing deep amounts of love and desire and pleasure, or stiller. I mean, you can move and be still, right? You can move from stillness. And, you can, if you look at a good Tai Chi practitioner, or a good Qigong practitioner, they're moving, but they're moving from a very deep, still place. And that's what makes the movement a good dancer. Same thing. If you watch somebody leading a tango or a salsa dance or something like that, they're very grounded, but they're moving. They're moving. They're guiding her. They're assisting her movement. They're helping to direct her movement and evoke more of her movement from their stillness. There's a lot of nuance that you can pick up on this. And I think anybody who says just be more masculine and hold space drives women fucking crazy. If you just hold space, they'll just be like, hello, hello, is what I'm doing anything to you? So I just think that what's happening is that paradigm, which I think David was trying to instill because men had never been, and they still have not been taught it, is only half true. Yeah.
So I love the example these school kids, because I run workshops with kids at school sometimes, and I see this they can't sit still. As you say, you've got ants in their pants and they're moving around. No one taught them to be still, and then we add in this layer now where we've got phones that just amp up our brains to be whizzing around at 100 miles an hour. And I wonder, how can we teach the principles that you're bringing, feeling, sensitivity, groundedness to young men and boys? Because young men and boys are really struggling for role models. I'm sure you've heard of the wonderful Andrew Tate and how he's influenced young boys in many ways. He's shown them the winning. He's shown them the winning as being the thing, and it being a step-by-step thing. And so the groundedness and the sensitivity for a lot of boys wouldn't even seem very attractive. They wouldn't see it as the route to what they really want.
Not yet. But they will, right? They will, and they may win. And this happened with the pickup artists that I saw in the 90s and early 2000s, right? They were really good at winning, at seducing, but they weren't really good at, and they haven't been really good at loving. And it depends on what they're being driven by, right? Are you driven to love? Or are you driven to seduce and win and get a lot of notches on your belt? And I think that's as men grow older, as they move from being young men to men, what do I want to use my energy, my presence, my capacity for? And I just happen to believe that most men that I work with are really good men. They want to love well. They want to love partners well, whether it's one partner or multiple partners. They want to love really well. And I think the problem with Andrew Tate is that, that seems to be missing. That piece seems to be missing, just like it was with the pickup artists, right? It's about winning. And you get some pretty shitty karma along the way, whether you believe in karma, but, you can only, fuck people over so many times without it starting to impact you. And I see guys, what happens is that those guys, I saw this with the pickup artists a lot, like guys who were really good at that, they'll fall in love at some point and not know how to be in like real relationship. They'll get their fucking ass kicked and then they'll be like, what? So I assume something's going to happen with young boys coming up following that model.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting you mentioned the pickup artist. It's a world that I started, my work started there. And it's exactly what I saw. We used to call them shells. Men who you'd meet and they'd be great they could be amazing with a woman for about 4 hours. They had about 4 hours. But after that, everything started to fall apart because they didn't have anything underneath. They just had this shell of acted charisma, funny jokes, a number of stories they could tell, and so forth, but they lacked any depth. They lacked any substance to who they were. And they were just shells of men, really. And I think we see the same with men who are, the winning, as you said, like even in the kind of financial sense inside the business, men who focus all their time on the winning of the money and the success and the status, they suffer from the same thing. They lack any kind of authentic expression because they've just taken on what they think they need to do, what they think they need to be. So everyone else looks at them and says, you're winning. Well done, man. I want to be winning like you.
Yeah. It's sad. And I think I'd like to think that there's a number of young men, coming into their 20s and early 30s that are starting to really be called to a level of depth and integrity in the world that transcends just winning. I believe that. I believe that's happening. I see that happening. I'm in a bubble, in this world a little bit. So, but great change always happens on the margins. It always starts on the margins. And so, these things we see now about, 10 years ago, nobody was talking about embodiment. 5 years ago, very few people. I mean, now you just throw a rock on Instagram, you hit an embodiment coach, relationship coach, but no one was talking about it. So that tells me that there is a shift in consciousness and that people are really starting to get that there is a deeper game to play.
Yeah. I kind of see it now as like there's almost a spectrum. There's people that live on one end and it's like they're in kind of insecure attachment, they're traumatized, they're living out of their trauma and they don't know. They think that's how the world is and that's how everyone else is. Yeah. And they're often obsessed with looks and status and money and relationships are like a game. Like I need to get a person that makes me look better, that can bring me up the social ladder. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got those who've done the healing. I'm not going to say they're completely healed, but they've done the healing or they're doing the healing as well. They've moved to a place of more secure attachment. They're able to communicate. Maybe they even allow themselves to be, driven by something much bigger than themselves, soul, divine, God, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And over there, they're attracted by good values, deep connection, shared vision for legacy and, a number of other things. And it's when you're looking from, the side of the healing and you look over at the side of the kind of non-healing, it's like, wow, that's fucking chaotic over there. But the people in the the space of like the chaos and the unhealed nature, they look over at the people in the healing and they don't believe them. they see what they want to see. They see those people like, oh, they have money, they're successful. That's why they've got the relationships. That's why they look happy.
Right. It's a big societal piece of trauma, to be honest with you. Yeah. So what I see now happening is that parents are starting to learn these values and these practices themselves and bringing them to their children. So I think we're going to start to see this next generation of boys and men have a different set of skills and resources that include things like meditation, breath work, yogic work, embodiment work, in ways that your generation, my generation, did not have. At least that's my hope, and I think that's happening again. I live in Austin, and it's very prevalent there. But I think it's I think that it's just starting to spread this awareness that there is a deeper, more embodied game to be played, especially in relationship.
So it's like we can teach because I'm imagining, all the people like myself and the many other people that go through your programs and other programs, they either got children or they're starting to have children, and they're just kind of naturally bring these practices in. I'm thinking of one of my old clients actually, where him and his wife with their son, they did a lot of breathing together. Like if he felt dysregulated, for instance, upset, annoyed, they had taught him that the thing for him to do is maybe go into another room and breathe for a few minutes and then come back. And then they would talk to him and ask him, how are you feeling? What was happening for you? So he was learning to be able to, take himself and reground and come back to stillness and regulate himself, but also to come back and then express what was there, what was going on for him as well.
Yeah. I think that's starting to be more and more prevalent. I was very lucky. My mom, became a Buddhist when I was 7. So I was taught meditation very, very young. And so I think that I kind of lucked out in that realm. I was also taught yoga quite young. And so, I lucked out, but I think a lot of men are just now realizing that there are these two tracks that you mentioned. One is, and I teach both. David teaches the yogic piece, and the yogic piece is, how do I embody presence, depth, sexual capacity, intimacy, love? How do I embody and share those things with a partner? Well, the healing piece, which I also think is super important, has to do with healing each other's nervous systems and healing our own nervous system and each other's nervous system. And that includes, everything from therapy to trauma work to, even including breath work and all these other healing modalities that are coming now, because you can be very good yogically, like meaning you're artful at loving, right? And you can create super deep connection and even deep sex and all these sort of things. But the healing piece is what allows sustainability. And, I'm still working on that. Everybody I know is still working on that healing piece. There's a third piece to relationship I think is important, which is the karmic piece, which is the healing, not just for healing of our lineage, right? Because most of us now realize that a lot of our trauma is epigenetic, meaning it was passed down in our DNA from our mothers and fathers. And so we're not just healing and changing our relationship to love for us, but it's actually changing the karma of our lineages, I believe. Hopefully that's not too woo-woo for your audience, but I think all three of those things matter, which is why, I do this thing called the feminine reconciliation. I do a masculine reconciliation for women too, but that's where you go back and you look at all of your relationships and all of your patterns, and you try to make things right because you're really trying to change that karma. And so I think all three of those things are needed in order for a sort of holistic approach to relationship, and especially for men.
Because that karmic piece is almost like our pre-installed programming, you know, like it's the stuff that we do and the way we act that we never really chose about, you know. I had a conversation with my partner the other night at the end of a long work week, and I don't know how we got to this, and she was talking about her grandparents and how her grandparents were with her, and how she saw at a point in her life, she saw how her grandparents treated her father, and then how her father kind of tried to do better with her. But she saw how he didn't get that far, should we say, right? And now she's able to see him with her sister's children, her niece and nephews, and she's like, he's like a different man. Like, he's able to love. And we were talking how beautiful that is and how healing that's been for her just to witness him doing that. And I was contrasting that with my own family, right? And my grandma is somewhat cold and a bit distant and so forth. And it really came to this point where we were talking. I was like, no one in my family, until really my mother, I'd say on my mother's side, really knew how to love and be loved. Like, no one knew. Like, there's this generations of people not receiving love, not knowing how to give love. And it just keeps happening, you know, it keeps happening. And everyone tries to do a little bit better. You know, they see some aspect of like, I'm not going to do that to my kids, but they still miss the bigger piece, which is capacity to love and receive love. And, you know, when we come to do this work, as you said, this karmic work, this healing work, the yogic work, it's like we're able to like almost like jump forward a few generations of evolution in one lifetime, you know, so that our children, our offspring, those that come in contact with us, they don't get past as much of a heavy burden. You know, the burden, we're never going to get that burden down to zero. It's a bit like the half-life of radioactive materials, but we can do our best to maybe speed it up a bit so that it's a much smaller burden for them to carry on.
Exactly. I think that's beautifully put. And I think that there is a bit of momentum now, especially in your generation. You know, my generation still struggles, but there's momentum that's kind of gained over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And I hopefully, you know, if you have children, you know, your children will have so much, it'll be culturally appropriate, and there'll be resources for, you know, young men in particular to love more. I love the way you put that, because nobody taught us that the capacity to love is a skill that can be developed and mastered. You know, you can turn on love like that, even when you don't feel like it. You can control your capacity to withhold love and transmute it into an expression of love. It's really important for women too, right? We can learn through what I would call embodiment and practice. We can learn to transmute not loving, like the generational not loving impulse in our body, our reactivity, our punishment, our defense mechanisms, and we can transmute that into loving, you know, by learning a set of skills and doing, you know, a decent amount of healing, but we can transmute it. And hopefully that's where we're at.
Yeah.
But you got to put in the fucking work. This is not the kind of thing where you go to a weekend and expect to change lifetimes of genetic, like you talked about, genetic impulse. We've got to do the work, man, which is, you know, why I do what I do.
It's years of work. I see this with clients that come to me and they're like, oh, I want to change this way which I relate and stuff. And I say to them, okay, cool. Like, it's gonna, you know, I can't give you a timeline on it, but they're like, you know, how far do you want to get in 6 months? And they're like, oh, I want to be at this point where this doesn't happen anymore and I don't do this. And I'm like, that's really unrealistic. You know, this is going to take years and it may never completely disappear. It just gets to the point where your awareness is so sharp that, you know, instead of controlling you for days on end, you know, you catch it in an hour, you know, maybe it's a fear response or a shutting down, but you catch it in an hour instead of it going and causing havoc in your life for weeks.
Yeah. And I think what I find is that most people don't realize how much, because not only do we have this generational impulse that, you know, and we're not even talking about social, right? The the social weight of being a man or being a woman, or the masculine and the feminine. So we've got these huge impulses over thousands of years, right? We're now at this crazy evolutionary moment where we don't need to be in relationship. Like, this is new. Up until 50 years ago, 70 years ago, like, women needed men for certain kinds of things, and relationships were about security and building family and, you know, working the farm or working the land. I mean, it's only been 100 years or so in 160,000 years where that has shifted, where now we get to be in relationship for other reasons, for healing, for the amplification of love, for sexual expression, all these things. So we're at a moment in history that is very unique, and we get to decide what we want to do with it. And so the impulse to love is relative to be in relationship just for love, to amplify love, is kind of new. It's kind of new. And at least separate from security, right? I'm sure there's been love throughout the ages, but separate from security. And so what we're learning is that the capacity to love is not only part of our you know, thousands of days of our own life, but also all these generations. And so it takes lots of practice, takes lots of rewiring of our neural pathways and our bodies and our, you know, habitual closures. And I think what I see is that people don't realize how much breath work they need every fucking day. How much they need to remember. Am I grounded? Am I breathing? Am I grounded? Am I breathing? Is my heart open? Am I thinking, or is my heart, am I thinking, or is my heart open and my breath deep? How many times a day we need to be reminded of that? It's pretty staggering when you think about it.
I'm just thinking of my own journey, especially the last few years, you know, because I kind of come across, it was during lockdown, I come across one of your videos, and at the time with my partner, we were having these cycles where she was getting really upset and anxious, and then I would react to her anxiousness, and I would, like, you know, want to stop it and shut it down. And one of your videos was talking about just being present and breathing and feeling the ground and sitting there. And, you know, I tried it. I was like, okay, this John guy, he seems like he knows what he's talking about, right? Got all these women sitting in front of him. He must know something. So I started to do this. And it slowly and surely, sitting, breathing, being present, eyes open, not listening to the story in my head, the judgments about what she was saying, but listening to the words. Sometimes there'd be some reflecting back, like, I'm hearing you say this, I'm feeling this. But also sometimes just allowing her to empty the feelings and emotions that she had. And then at that moment, move towards her, like really move towards her. And it took a few months for it to really make a noticeable difference, you know, and this was happening multiple times a week. And it was practice. Like, I was having to, you know, breath work in the morning, half an hour of meditation. You know, I was pretty dedicated to that. And it was still something that was hard to me. The habit was deeply ingrained and rooted for many, many years, maybe even generations back. I see my dad do it still. And the practice, it pays off, right? Because, you know, our relationship has really flourished because we're able to be with each other, even in the moments of difficulty, of her when she's anxious and me when I want to shut down and avoid.
Yeah. And, you know, you got to think our nervous systems have been trained for defense and protection, and to be trained to give love and be open. You know, it's thousands of hours of practice. So for anybody watching this, you know what I mean? This is, you know, hopefully you get some value out of this, but this will not fix shit, right? This is, you got to get on the mat, right? Yeah.
But there's some quick wins, guys. Don't just feel there's no point jumping in. There's some quick wins to be had. You know, like any, I don't know if you've read this book. It's by George Leonard. I read it years ago. I think it's called Mastery. And he talks about the flow of learning something. You know, there's like a step up. We're like, oh, I'm learning something. And then there's like a dip down. and we kind of feel like, oh, this isn't helping. And then there's another sudden step up that happens when we continue our practice and we stay disciplined and diligent. And that's definitely what I found.
Yeah, yeah. What I'll notice is that there's a massive up level of technology and information when people come to a workshop. Just their capacity to breathe, their capacity to be present, their capacity to run more energy. So there's this sort of massive up leveling in the first workshop or two, and then people hit a plateau, and they're, and then there's another up leveling and another up leveling. And yeah, of course, I'm always just reticent to think that there's no quick fix, Molly does not, substitute for breath and embodiment work. Right? Ayahuasca is not a substitute for deep meditation, and nothing wrong with those things, but they're not, there's no quick fix.
Sounds like a t-shirt right there, John.
That's the start of the program. Yeah.
I'm going to quote you from your book, right? I loved your book.
Thank you.
I really shared it with clients. I shared it with friends, and, really fantastic embodiment of so much what you talk about across the many podcasts and your videos. But there's a part in here that really was a big shift in me and my relationship. And I imagine for the listeners to know this. In the book, page 107, if anyone's interested. The primary feminine pain point is almost always about love, or rather there isn't enough of it. And I paraphrase, miss out a bit of it, and the masculine myth is there's not enough freedom. Like when I got this, when it first hit me, I was just like, holy shit. I remember hearing you say it a number of years ago, and I was like, wait a minute. This explains my whole fucking relationship and dating life, pretty much, in a nutshell, my experience. But I'm interested in what you think and what you see, how these two things kind of show up in people's lives, in their relationships, but also in their internal, inner masculine and feminine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's true for the feminine in a man as well, or in anybody, right? That when we feel that there's not enough love, we will suffer. If that's the story, right? They're not loving me the right way. She's not loving me the right way. He's not loving me the right way. We'll suffer. And the antidote to that is to understand that we are the generators of love, right? That we primarily, not that we can't receive it and we should receive it, all that, but that the primary stance is, how do I generate love? Or how do I, generate's not even the right word. How do I open to the love that's already there? So there is a flow of love, right? Right now, we just felt how many people are loving each other right now on the planet. There's this jet stream of love, this cosmic jet stream of love that's always available. We can tap into it at any time. And when we get there, we realize I have a lot of agency. I'm actually empowered to be love. You hear this all the time, but to be love, and then to literally press love through my body and into whoever. So this myth of not enough love is an external myth, that he's not giving me enough love, or she's not giving me enough love, or there's not going to be enough love, versus this sort of self-generated relaxing into the infinite flow of love that's always available. Same thing for the masculine in all of us. The masculine in all of us feels bound. If you hear a guy complaining about anything, if you drill down, it will be because he feels bound or constrained in some way. I'm constrained in my job. I'm constrained in my purpose. I'm constrained in my relationship. I'm not able to be sexually expressed freely, or be able to be, to have enough money to be free, right? It's always about it's always external. And the real myth of that is that even people with tons of money still don't feel totally free. There's still something, and so when you see men's strategy for happiness, it revolves around creating freedom. I'll travel the world, or I'll be polyamorous, or I'll make so much money that I can do whatever the fuck I want. And ultimately it's still external, and men will get to this place where their consciousness needs to be free. their thoughts. They're either bound by their thoughts, they're bound by the limitations of their body, or they're bound by their, capacity to feel the infinite. So true freedom, come as no shock, true freedom and true love are internal projects and skills that we can master and use as resources. And if we do, we are better lovers, better parents, better community members, better business people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And just generally happier,
So it's sourcing internally from what's already there and feeling what already exists. I spent some time with you in the program in the desert, and I always remember you quite often said, it's like, she's trying to love you. Just like pause and feel it. She's trying to love you. And it's something I've taken any time I'm in a place where there's like trees or nature or even just the sky, it's like pause and drop into the awareness of they're trying to love you. I even did it when I was on a street. I was in the supermarket and I was like, man, like even the supermarket's trying to love me, It's got food here for me. It's got good lighting. It's a nice temperature. But we kind of, it's like our way in which we ignore information. We're always ignoring that this information is already there. This love, this freedom, they already exists. But we only put our attention on what we see is lacking that is coming towards us in obvious ways.
Yeah. We're still very much tuned to survival. So, I mean, at any moment, at any moment, a man or a woman or whoever can feel, can literally tune their awareness to love or to consciousness or to nature or to the things that are infinite and expansive. And as we put our awareness on something, our capacity to receive its transmission grows. It's not complicated, right? It's just we're so habituated to putting our awareness on thought. And that thought is normally thoughts of survival, right? In some form or fashion. 90% of our thoughts are thoughts of survival that do have nothing to do with the present moment. Winning is a survival strategy. Getting certain kinds of love is a survival strategy. And so our capacity to be aware of what the cosmos is presenting to us is a skill set, a practice, a nervous system capacity. And so I think what men are bouncing into is this, what you alluded to, is this sense that life is already trying to nourish us. We just have to shut the fuck up and stop thinking all the time and receive it. Receive it through our bodies, receive it through our eyes. It's one of the reasons why I live where I live in Sedona, because it's so like, she's just like, oh, take it. She's like doming me with natural beauty. And so in Panama, it's like when we were in the desert, right? The desert's like, oh, take all this stillness and beauty. And it's just like, forcing it onto us, which is why nature is such an important practice for men in particular. Getting into nature, really getting into nature, really tuning into nature, really receiving what the great she, you might call, is wanting to give us.
Yeah. It took me a long time to really realize that nature is so giving, because I grew up in the city. So it's like, I love city life, I love being around big tall buildings and so forth. And I think it wasn't really until I did some traveling for a couple of years, 5-6 years ago. And I found myself in places in like India, and you're in, and it's just like open space, or you're in the Himalayas and you're like, wow, like the air is so crisp and clean and it's so quiet. Like, you can just feel the stillness that's just there. There's nothing demanding your attention, but everything is demanding your attention. If there's no like cars, there's no one shouting for you. You don't have to do anything later, but yet the whole expanse around you is demanding your attention, but not in a way that feels like it's taking from you.
Yeah.
But like you are being with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things I talk about in the book, that one of the things I think men need is to be in spaces of no demand. And it's even better to be in spaces of no demand where nothing wants anything from you yet you're being filled, right? Just, I don't want anything from you, nature says, right? But I'm going to offer everything to you, right? And so you can just, and I think I also see that, women are like that a lot. They want to love us. They want us to feel, if you think of an individual woman as a forest, right? A piece of, or an ocean, or a piece of nature, right? There'll be calm days, there'll be playful days, there'll be stormy days, there'll be, There'll just be, it doesn't mean that it's any less nature. She's any less nature based. It's just that we only want it to be sunny, and we don't actually, care for the blizzards or the storms or the monsoons. And yet those are just as beautiful if we're able to be with them.
I'm thinking of, all the things that my partner does for me, the things I never see, the times she's thinking about me, the times that, maybe she brings me a glass of water in the middle of the day when I'm working, or the times that she goes and calms herself down. These are all little micro ways in which she is loving me. And if I start to shift my point of view and my perspective to observing those and receiving those as love and not ignoring them, then the dynamic of the relationship transforms, right? And if this is two people in a relationship with each other and they're bringing more of their focus to the tiny pieces of love that we're being given. Every day, maybe your husband goes to work and he comes home and he kisses you. That kiss is a sign of love. Or maybe, I don't know, I'm trying to think of all sorts of things. Someone even just like, bringing a meal is an obvious one, right? But it's also even someone, the men in the program, that the men coming to the program that have partners, like, it's a sign of love for their relationship and their partner. Yeah. And if we received that much love, we wouldn't be worrying about if there's enough, because we would experience our relationship as being never-endingly loving.
Yeah. There is a constant flow of love available to us if we expand our awareness. Yeah. Oftentimes, I think a really fun practice is to just experience her as love. Like, to just feel, how like a tree has a transmission? It doesn't have to, you're not talking to the tree's not hugging you, the tree's not making you a cup of tea, the tree's not, Like, the tree's not doing anything, but it's transmitting. And our feminine partners are often transmitting love, beauty, desire, energy, right? And if we're not tuned in to this constant transmission, we will constantly be looking for a specific, flavor or texture of it that we think we need, while missing the whole, 98% of the transmission that could be just like, oh, like, the way she's moving is really beautiful energy, or I can feel just her radiance coming through the space, or I can, and it really is a practice to become aware of the innate transmission of your partner and how it could feed you more without you having to demand anything or do anything differently.
And it's such a subtle mental shift that would, that to be, I see it as, it's like if you're a sea animal and you're swimming in the sea, and that's the general day of life. And you kind of come up for air and you just take of this air of like presence and awareness of what's possible, and you take that back into the day-to-day of your relationship. You're not going to be able to be in this state constantly in your relationship, because life has demands. Yeah. But if we can bring 1%, 2%, 3%, 10% more of this into our relationship, that is like absolutely transformative in and of itself.
Yeah. And I'm going to just, as I gave that one practice to the men that are watching, like, go home and feel every movement, every sound, everything she's doing as the expression of love and energy and radiance, right? Then acknowledge it. Like I remember my partner a couple months ago was sitting outside lying by the pool doing yoga. And it was so beautiful. I was just like, fuck, so beautiful. And I went to her and I said, thank you. Just thank you for just filling this space with this beauty and love. And it moved her and she felt seen. And she wasn't even trying to be seen, And so I think there's it's a really beautiful thing to start to, like, if you're just sitting on the couch still in thought or breath or presence, and your partner comes up to you and says, thank you for your depth, I imagine you'll want to do it more, I imagine you'll want to be like, and it'll probably just be nice to be seen, so yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Take facts again, John. I've noticed you talking about something, the 6 pillars of sacred intimacy. And I thought this would be a beautiful thing to bring.
It's actually
I'd
3.
love you to go through the 3. I thought it was 6.
3 pillars.
Okay,
No,
I'll edit.
3.
3 pillars. All right, great. We've got even more time left. What are the pillars?
Okay, thank you for asking. I mean, each pillar has a number of things underneath it, but I've kind of whittled them down to 3, carved out 3. The first is, and this is for sacred intimacy, right? This is to develop a relationship that is, as full of all the things we're talking about today as possible. The first is the capacity to just be intimate, meaning to feel sameness. Right? I'm human, you're human. I have a heart, you have a heart. I want love, you want love. I'm afraid sometimes, you're afraid sometimes. And it's this recognition of our shared tendencies, our shared traits and humanity. Then a deeper level of intimacy would be, seeing the essence and the sameness of each other, like in a beautiful eye-gazing practice where space disappears and there's just 2 hearts or two souls, right? And so there's practices that allow for intimacy. There's communication practices, there's vulnerability practices, there's withhold practices, there's eye-gazing practices, and those practices create sameness. Sameness, like just a very deep, beautiful, and we can do that with anybody. We can be intimate, with men, for example, or children, or even animals or nature. So there's intimacy that's needed. The second piece I define as a devotion to your partner's nervous system, and that means that you take responsibility for helping to downregulate, ground, heal, soften, just open your partner's body and nervous system to bring them out of the states of fight or flight that they, get into in life and in relationship. And that has a whole different set of skill sets, right? That's learning to downregulate your nervous system and then downregulate their nervous system. That's using breath practice. That's using soft eyes. That's softening your heart. That's changing your tone of voice, becoming a very soft, grounding voice. That's grounding your own body and then helping to, press down and ground their body. That's everything from, moving your hand up and down her spine to matching your breath to her breath to putting your hands on her thighs and saying, I'm not leaving, I love you, we're gonna work this out, you're safe here, tell me what you need. All those things have a down-regulating nervous system impact. And we can't really heal each other from nervous systems that are lit up. So we need to downregulate, and we need to be aware of we need to make our partner's nervous system more important than our need to be right in a moment or win an argument or, and that's hard. That's really hard work for a lot of us. But if that becomes the culture of the relationship, then you've got 2 people who are generously, downregulating each other's nervous systems daily through all kinds of fifth practices and things. And then that creates the foundation of safety for the third pillar, which is sexual polarity. And that is the deep exploration of sexual intimacy through our differences, through one partner being a fully expressed and feminine, force of nature, and the other partner being expressed as the grounded, deep expanse of consciousness. And then all of the yogic play that happens in that realm. And that's a whole different set of skills, right? To be able to work together as masculine and feminine practitioners. But what I see happening is that people want to get to that. They want to go from 1 to 3, right? And you've got this one leg on the stool that's like half the size of the other because nobody gives a shit about each other's nervous system. So they end up not feeling safe, and there's not a foundation of trust to build on. So when I see any couple in a challenging space, guaranteed there's one of those three or all of those three that are being neglected. And each one is an infinite space of practice that's never complete, and we're always going to be improving on and recommitting to and failing at and recommitting to, but those are the pillars. And so my second book is on those 3 pillars and how to create them and how to work with them.
Looking forward to that book, John. Looking forward to that one. Because I see this because I do some work with couples, and it's the sameness piece is like the problem usually is that we see them as other and as different to us at that stage, right? They're not like us. And then there becomes almost with the nervous system is like, where there's an argument and all there is the winning, the winning becomes more important than the connection. It's like, I think I read this somewhere. It's like we bring this kind of patriarchal idea of masculine into our relationship, which is winning arguments and make that more important than the connection. And then when we're in that state, we wonder why there's no sex, there's no polarity, there's no attraction, there's actually just friction. Yeah. But, as you've described there, it's like it's not a step-by-step, guys, listeners, it's not step-by-step, but it's this cyclical, continual refining and practicing on, but bringing more of those into our relationship to just bring more closeness. But then it gives us the space to celebrate our differences, our sexual differences.
Yeah. I mean, just for an easy one for men to get is there's different skill sets needed. Let's say, I imagine, I love basketball, but I'll stick with football since this is going to Europe. I imagine there's different skill sets. There's the skill set of shooting. There's the skill set of dribbling. There's the skill set of defense. You know what I mean? There's different skill sets and different strengths in each of those. There's probably more, but give me a break, I'm American. And there's probably more that goes into being a good football player. But you need all those things to be a good artist, right? And so being an artist of love requires lots of different skill sets, and each one has to be cultivated if you want to be a good artist of love. Yes.
And before we wrap up, I want to ask you about one more thing.
Yeah.
Tussle. You mentioned it in your book, right? Yeah. The practice of using humor and physicality and playful challenge and even cockiness. And I felt this was like a really powerful description of bringing, as you say in the book, like liberating love that's often lost in relationships, it becomes a serious nature. Mm-hmm. I'd love to kind of maybe explain a couple examples of where tussle goes right and when tussle is done right and when tussle is done massively wrong.
Right. Well, I think, first of all, if your partner is having a very serious, like emotional experience, tussle's probably not the right way to go, right? Until they get down-regulated. The right way to go would be down-regulate them first, then get playful after they feel safe, right? But if your partner's just kind of bitchy or grumpy, right, and you can cut that, you can cut what would be an argument or just a crappy state you can just cut that out at the knees and nip it in the bud, as they say. That's where tussle really comes in handy. So let's say your feminine partner comes home and she just had a crap day at work and she's feeling unloved and unseen and all of those things. And she, wants to take it out on you. And so, she barks about the trash. You're not taking the trash out, or how come you didn't take the trash out, or whatever. She's not really pissed at you. It's just, it's just the byproduct of a crap day. So that's a beautiful moment to kind of saunter up to her and, and like, I don't know, take a piece of trash and dance with it. You could do anything, or you could, you could, pull her into you and say, I love it when you tell me what to do. Or, there's any number of things. It's an art, right? Yeah. It's a playful art. Like, like, tell me again, like whisper that right here, like bark at me right here. I don't know, anything. And you'll know right away if it lightens the mood, right? If it loosens things up. And if it does, if she smiles and giggles, then give her a little more, lean in, like grab her and kiss her on the neck and, and that can dissolve, what could normally be a fight that would take up the whole evening. Like, a lot of guys will say like, don't take your fucking day out on me. Right? Or don't talk to me like that. Or, I took the trash out yesterday, whatever it is. Right. And it can just dissolve all that into a 30-second practice of unabashed, playful love. And so that's a good example of it going well, right? Where I see a bad example of it going well is it's the heart's they're not fully committed to it. They're not fully committed to love. It's I'm fucking with her, or I'm making fun of her. I'm not using humor and play and my body particularly. I'm not using my body to transmit the playful love that go with the words I might be saying, right? So if you're saying stuff and you're not bringing in the power of nonverbal communication, then oftentimes it'll be interpreted as insult or critique, or you're making fun of me, or you know what I mean? And that won't go well. That won't go well. So again, it's tussle is an art. David wrote about it, in a couple of his books. I think it's one of those things that guys just have to like feel their way through and pay attention and take some risks. When your partner's being, in a shit mood, like, blast her with playful love and see if it works. If it doesn't work, then maybe she needs a different approach. But man, I'd say, I don't think I'm being overly dramatic here, but I think 70% of fights can be avoided if people, especially men, know how to tussle with the feminine mood. Other way around too. If women knew how to bring like love and energy to our grumpiness and burden, change so much. It would feel so good. I don't want to be in a shit mood. If she's like dancing on me and loving on me and stroking my chest and telling me, what a grumpy bugger I am, I'm gonna be served by that. But we don't do that. We're trained to defend. That's our first thing. He's gonna come at me now, or he's not giving me the love, or she's not giving me the love. And it's just, not generous. So tussle is it's generous. Let's say, break it down and be like, tussle is bold, it's playful, it's heart open, and there's a full commitment to it. It's not something you can do half-assed. You have to be all in.
Yeah. It's something I love, many a day when my partner comes out of her, she comes out the office and she's like grumpy about her clients, and I'll be like, man, fuck those crazy bitches. They don't know who you are. And then I'll be like moving around the room, and she'll like look at me and be like, oh my God, this man is ridiculous. And then it's gone. And then we're talking about what we want to do, because otherwise if you defend and you go like, oh, why are you being like that? Like, don't be like that to me. You're escalating the situation into a place it just doesn't need to go.
No. And could take hours To think of how much energy we spend on fights that go for hours or days or longer, right?
Yeah.
And a little bit of capacity to be playful and loving in the face of your partner's grumpiness, to not take it personally, can save so much fucking time. It's amazing when you think about it, man. I don't know how many lifetimes have we spent, fighting over stupid shit, right? So,
too many.
Yeah.
Imagine a lot of us, far too much time. Time.
Yeah.
I could sit here with a billion more questions to ask John, right? I'm sure, and I've been lucky to be in workshops where he does just generously answer any question that comes along so wonderfully and beautifully as he has done today. But, we'll bring that to a close because we've reached time. Thank you, John. It's been wonderful. It's been hilarious. One of the things when I came back from the desert, many people were like, so what was the program like? What was John like? And I was like, you know what? John is a funny fucker. He is funny. You will spend a lot of time laughing. I was like, it's very easy when we're in the world of social media and videos. We can appear to be very serious. But John made me laugh a hell of a lot. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the program as well. But
thank you.
Where can the listeners get more of you? Where can they find your book or your soon-to-be book and your programs as well?
Yeah. Just johnwineland.com. Got all the stuff. I'm always excited to push people to the virtual workshop, which has got thousands of hours of content and hundreds of practices, and easy to get on. You can get a free week of it, and it's cheap, and it's got a lot of really beautiful content. So that's a great place for people to start. And my book is available on Amazon and everywhere else from the core. So thanks, David. I appreciate the conversation, man.
No, thank you very much. And all those details, listeners, they're in the show notes for you there. And yeah, I'm sure me and John would both love to hear what you take away from this episode, man. Maybe you've learned something about your women. Maybe you've tried out some of the things we talked about. A big caution flag around tussle. Be very mindful of some of the other bits and pieces. We'd love to hear. You can find us on Instagram and so forth. And I'll put all the details in the show notes around that. But John, big thank you to you and your work, and how you've transformed so many people's lives who you may never meet, but it's made such a difference to my life and many people I know.
Thank you, David. My pleasure, man.
Thank you. And listeners, until next week, ciao, ciao.